24-year-old Richard Martin was last seen in September of 1995, leaving a Williamston, South Carolina bar called Nancy's. 90 minutes later, he was found beaten and barely alive in the middle of a road 2.5 miles away. He had been bludgeoned with a small, weighted club known as a blackjack. During their investigation, deputies discovered that a woman had been seen dancing with both Martin and another man, Bobby McClan, at the bar. McClan reportedly became jealous and was known to carry a blackjack, making him the primary suspect. Authorities' suspicions grew when he revealed details of the crime that only the perpetrator would know and subsequently failed a polygraph test. However, by the time investigators could definitively prove McClan was the killer, he had been deceased for 15 years. While this meant he escaped legal justice, the finding allowed the case to finally be closed. 18-year-old Christine Galladas was last seen hitchhiking to her job in downtown Salt Lake City, Utah, in the middle of May 1985. Her brutally murdered body was found early the next morning by a passing driver in the city's Ballpark neighborhood. Galladas had been beaten, stabbed, and shot twice in the head, leading authorities to suspect she was killed by the person who had given her a ride. The severity of her injuries indicated she had fought fiercely for her life. In May of 2025, precisely 40 years after the murder, authorities announced they had identified an Air Force veteran, Ricky Lee Stallworth, as the probable killer. At the time of the crime, Stallworth was 27 years old and stationed at the nearby Hill Air Force Base. He would go on to marry 5 times and have 3 children before his death from natural causes in 2023. During the final 2 years of his life, Stallworth became known to law enforcement for his interactions with street-walking escorts and for a habit of leaving his house late at night and returning the next morning without explanation. Stallworth was identified through a combination of modern genetic technology and traditional detective work. A breakthrough occurred when a family member willingly provided a DNA sample, which helped confirm his identity. In February of 1986, 17-year-old Shandra May finished her shift at a McDonald's in Madden, Mississippi, and drove toward home. She disappeared just yards from her own driveway. For 3 weeks, her fate was a mystery until her body was discovered in a creek in the neighboring Hinds County, bound with duct tape. The investigation continued for years but yielded no definitive leads. Over time, suspicion began to center on a man named Reuben Weeks, who had a violent past, including a prison sentence for brutally assaulting a motel clerk 5 years after May's killing. Although detectives questioned Weeks, they lacked sufficient evidence to bring charges against him. The case saw a major breakthrough in April of 2025 when Weeks was arrested at his residence in Scott County. The arrest followed new cooperation from witnesses who were now willing to speak about the crime. Weeks is currently facing charges that include kidnapping and murder and is under supervision while awaiting his next court appearance. Following the arrest, retired investigator Michael Fraser revealed to news station WLBT that 3 witnesses were reportedly present during the crime, and their information was crucial in finally piecing the case together. The investigation is still active, and authorities have not dismissed the possibility of other individuals being involved. A 5-year mystery concluded in March of 2025 when the skeletal remains of a missing New Hampshire woman were discovered in a marsh in Derry. 23-year-old Amanda Gruski was last seen leaving a friend's house in the early morning hours of March 17, 2020. She disappeared without a trace, leaving behind her purse and phone. Gruski was known to sometimes disappear for periods, but would always contact her mother, Jessica, to check on her young daughter and siblings. After the discovery of the remains, Jessica told a local news outlet that she believed her daughter had run out of funds and was staying with friends. She expressed suspicions of foul play, stating Amanda would not have left without her belongings. Police have not publicly speculated on whether foul play was involved, but have assured the public that the case is under active investigation to determine the cause and manner of her death. On the day before Christmas Eve in 1983, 24-year-old Ronald Lee Novak was brutally murdered in his rural Walker, Iowa, home in what appeared to be a burglary. a friend discovered his lifeless, beaten body in an unheated room, his hands bound behind his back, with a gunshot wound to his chest. Investigators believed at least 2 killers had gone to Novak's home intending to steal money and marijuana. The suspects' identities remained unknown until cold case detectives recently focused their efforts on solving the murder. For at least 10 years, law enforcement tested DNA from Novak's clothing and a hammer used in the attack, eventually narrowing their focus to 3 brothers. Using genetic genealogy, police identified 64-year-old Michael Shapert as one of the alleged killers. In late May of 2025, Shapert was arrested in Oregon on a first-degree murder charge and agreed to be extradited to Iowa, where the case remains ongoing. The New Year's holiday, typically a symbol of new beginnings, marked a tragic end for 24-year-old Janette Rolston. On New Year's Eve in 1977, she was last seen leaving the Lion's Den bar in San Jose, California, with an unidentified man. A month later, her decomposing body was discovered stuffed into the back seat of her own car near an apartment complex. She had been assaulted and strangled to death with a dress shirt. The killer had also attempted to set the car on fire to destroy evidence. The case remained cold until 2024, when a fingerprint from one of Rolston's cigarette packs matched a 69-year-old Ohio man and Army veteran named Willie Eugene Sims. At the time of the murder, Sims was stationed at a nearby fort. He was convicted of a violent assault the year after Rolston's murder, but had left California before his DNA was entered into the National Offender Database. After the fingerprint match, detectives from multiple agencies collaborated to obtain a DNA sample from Sims. It was a positive match to DNA found under Rolston's fingernails and on the shirt used to strangle her. In May of 2025, Sims was arrested on suspicion of murder. In June of 1975, Florida teenagers and best friends, Darlene Zatoa and Barbara Shriber, were seen getting into a white van occupied by 2 men. Having just completed the 8th grade, they had left their Hollywood school with their report cards, tragically unaware they would not live to see their first day of high school. Reports indicate that Zatoa and Shriber were known to hitchhike and entered the van of their own accord. The next day, their bodies were discovered on a dirt road in the Everglades. Both girls had been shot to death. Their murders remained unsolved for nearly 5 decades. Hoping to provide long-awaited answers for the victims' families, the Broward County Sheriff's Office reopened the investigation after establishing a full-time cold case squad in 2019. In May of 2025, nearly half a century after the killings, authorities announced they had identified the perpetrators, Robert Clark Keebler and Lawrence Stein. Both men had criminal histories stretching back to the early 1970s, with Keebler's record including violent crimes like robbery and aggravated assault. They were both deceased by the time they were linked to the murders. Stein passed away in 2005, and Keebler in 2019. Investigators used advanced DNA technology and located a new witness who saw the girls enter the van, which helped confirm Keebler and Stein as the killers. In August of 1986, the discovery of partial human skeletal remains in Ellijay, Georgia, launched a mystery that would remain unsolved for nearly 4 decades. On the 9th of August, 1986, a group of hunters came across a disturbing scene in a wooded area approximately 5 miles southwest of Ellijay in Gilmer County, Georgia. The location, set just off the Appalachian Highway, was secluded and far from the town's daily traffic. As they navigated the terrain, they discovered partially skeletal human remains strewn across the forest floor. Alarmed by the discovery, they promptly alerted local authorities. Police quickly secured the scene to protect any potential evidence. The remains showed advanced decomposition, with bones exposed and separated, suggesting the body had been in that location for a considerable time. The scene was unsettling and immediately raised suspicions of foul play. While investigators documented and collected evidence, the state of the remains presented significant challenges for identification and the overall investigation. A medical examiner's autopsy officially ruled the death a homicide. Although there were no immediate clues to the victim's identity, the nature of the skeletal injuries pointed to intentional harm. This confirmation brought new urgency to the case, and investigators intensified their search for the victim's identity and the circumstances of his death. They scoured missing persons reports, contacted neighboring jurisdictions, and looked for connections to other regional crimes. Despite exploring every possible avenue, from dental records to potential witness statements, no solid identification could be achieved. The case eventually went cold, with the remains unidentified and the perpetrator unknown. Nearly 40 years later, in February of 2024, the investigation was revitalized. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Cold Case Unit, in collaboration with the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council and Othram, set out to apply modern DNA technology to the long unidentified remains from Gilmer County. Using advanced techniques, they hoped to accomplish what was impossible during the original investigation. Scientists at Othram applied forensic-grade genome sequencing to the severely degraded skeletal evidence. This process, which facilitates detailed genetic analysis, even on compromised samples, allowed for the creation of a genealogical profile. This profile was then uploaded to genealogical databases to search for living relatives. The nationwide search eventually led to a breakthrough using kin-SNP rapid relationship testing, a method that confirms genetic links. The results pointed to David Clary. At the time of his death, he was in his late 20s, consistent with the initial autopsy's age estimate. His last known whereabouts were in Gwinnett County, Georgia. In February of 2025, his family was officially notified, finally receiving answers after years of uncertainty. David Clary was born in 1957 and spent most of his life in Charlotte, North Carolina, where he grew up. At the age of 29, his work required frequent travel, often taking him through the metro Atlanta area and various parts of North Georgia, a region with which he had become quite familiar. With David's identification, the case has been reclassified and is now open and active. Investigators are working to retrace his final movements in the hope of uncovering leads that could point to a suspect or motive. No suspects have been publicly identified, and the reason for the killing is still unknown. Authorities continue to appeal to the public for information. Anyone with information is encouraged to contact the GBI Regional Investigative Office in Cleveland at 706-348-4866. Anonymous tips can also be provided to the GBI tip line at 1-800-597-TIPS 8477. The disappearance of a 16-year-old from his Kansas City, Kansas home in 1972 initiated a long and painful wait for answers, with a major breakthrough in the case only occurring decades later. On April 18, 1973, a grim discovery was made about 3 miles southeast of Garnett, Kansas, off 1550 Road, where the decomposing remains of an unidentified male were found in a remote area. The state of the body suggested the person had been deceased for a significant amount of time, and this discovery raised more questions than it answered. The unidentified man was found wearing a brown corduroy jacket, a green long-sleeved button-up shirt, jeans, and a black leather belt with a large buckle. His attire also included brown hiking boots and a navy blue stocking cap. Several items of jewelry were recovered from the body, including 2 gold rings with cross engravings, a ring bearing the number 78, and a silver chain with a large cross. These personal effects were carefully documented in the hope that they might be recognized. An autopsy was performed, and the coroner ruled the man's death a homicide due to clear signs of trauma. Forensic analysis suggested the victim was approximately 20 years old, with brown hair and a slender frame. Despite these clues from the autopsy and personal items, authorities were unable to determine his identity at the time. Over the years, law enforcement made numerous attempts to identify the remains. They examined missing persons reports from Kansas and beyond, commissioned forensic sketches, and made public appeals for information. However, no connections were made that could provide a name for the victim or clarify the circumstances of his death. As leads dried up, the investigation gradually lost momentum and eventually went cold. In 2024, More than 5 decades after the remains were found, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation launched a new effort to identify them. Thanks to advancements in forensic science, samples from the unidentified individual were sent to Othram, an effort funded by the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. By early 2025, a breakthrough occurred. Testing by Othram led to the identification of genetic relatives of the unknown man, marking a significant step forward in a case that had been unsolved for over 50 years. This provided investigators with renewed hope and a clear direction. Following the information from the forensic genealogy, agents from the Kansas Bureau of Investigation and the Anderson County Sheriff's Office located potential family members. After conducting interviews and obtaining a DNA sample from one of the siblings, the sample was submitted for comparison. The analysis confirmed what had been unknown for so long. The remains belonged to Jimmy Allen Dawes. After more than 50 years, he was no longer a John Doe. Jimmy was born in 1956. In 1972, at 16 years old, Jimmy was living with his close-knit family in Kansas City, Kansas. When he failed to return home, his parents, knowing it was uncharacteristic of him, became alarmed and filed a missing person report. Authorities launched an investigation, searching neighborhoods and following any leads, but to no avail. His family, who endured decades without answers, finally received confirmation of what had become of their son and brother. With Jimmy's identity confirmed, the focus of the case has shifted. Local investigators and the Anderson County Sheriff's Office have intensified their efforts to uncover the circumstances of his death. The case, once a nameless mystery, now has a face and a history. Investigators are re-examining old records, interviewing individuals who may have known Jimmy in the early 1970s, and seeking new information that could finally identify who was responsible for his death. Authorities urge anyone with information about the case to come forward.